Hi, thank you so much for having me here. I'm really excited to get a chance to talk about some of the neural nets we've been training at OpenAI. I'm going to go ahead. I'm pre-recording now the main part of my talk, which will be about 20 minutes or so, and then I will be around sort of virtually in person afterwards to answer any questions. I'm going to be presenting two different neural nets that we've published these last couple of years. The first is MuseNet and the second Jukebox. They're slightly different approaches to generating music, which I'll get into. But to start, I thought I'd go ahead and jump into playing a few examples so you get a sense of the sort of music we're talking about. I'll start first with MuseNet examples. So this is a model that I'm never actually explicitly telling it anything about, say, composers or notes or rhythms, but it's learning all these things based on many, many examples, hundreds of thousands of examples of existing pieces. So this is when you take a model and you train it and then turn around and ask it to generate a new piece imitating the style of Beethoven. And this is doing a violin and piano sonata. Go ahead and cut that one off for now. And here is if you take that same model, but instead ask it to compose a piece in the style of jazz. Here you'll hear piano, bass, and drums. But again, I'm never telling it anything about the rhythm or prescribing anything like that. This is entirely created by the model. As well. So as you possibly heard in these examples, MuseNet lives entirely in the world of MIDI music as opposed to raw audio. And what that means is we're capturing things like the events of when the notes turn on and off, how loud the notes are, what instrument is playing them, even some things like, you know, if the pianist presses the pedal down or the drummer switches to a specific instrument, things like that get captured. However, all the sort of nuances of the actual human performance are not there at all. So if it's a cello, it's going to sound like a MIDI cello. If, you know, we can kind of get a hint of what a voice might sound like, but it doesn't sound like an actual human voice. You don't do words along with it or anything like that. But in some ways, I like to think about MIDI as very much the way a composer might think of a piece. So it makes it a little bit easier to think about getting long structures. And as you might have heard in those examples, MuseNet is able to do things like it'll have a melody that then returns later on in the piece, or it can even do, like, I've heard it do slight variations. If if you ask it to do bluegrass, it might kind of do a variation on a theme the second time around. However, it's totally losing the nuance of the real raw audio. So talking a little bit about the neural net that's actually behind all of this, we're using a transformer architecture. And this is a specific kind of neural net. It's the way that most people are doing text generation at this point. So here, what we might be doing for text is we give it a series of sentences, and we ask it to predict what word is going to come next. So the neural net might see something like, well, the very first is just a question mark because it doesn't know what the first word is going to be. And again, before all the training, the neural net is just going to spit out random words. It's going to be total garbage. But as it's seen lots and lots of examples, it's going to start learning, I see that humans usually begin sentences with the, or he, or she, it, any of these words. We can all think of sort of more common words for beginning sentences. And then we tell it, okay, in this training example, the first word is hello. Now, based on having that information, what do you think the next word is going to be? And at that point, we're no longer totally shooting in the dark. We might guess, okay, maybe hello, how are you might be our phrase. Hello, my hello, where, there are a couple more natural answers. There are obviously still many, many, many good options, but we've narrowed down we have more information at this point. At this point, we say, okay, now it's hello, my, and most of us are thinking, okay, it's probably going to be name. Maybe it's like, hello, my car is broken down or something like that, but probably it's going to be name. If we had to guess, we would say name. And at this point, we're very sure. We know, okay, it's really going to be, hello, my name is. We're not going to say, hello, my name are, hello, my name. There's really nothing else that we're going to say at that point. Maybe my names or something like that, like an apostrophe S. But we're really limited at choices at this point. And the really neat thing here is that the model learns that in order to be grammatically correct, you really are locked in at this point. However, when you hit this moment, now all of a sudden we have kind of a cool branching moment. It's almost a moment of creativity, because in the millions of training examples this model will see, hello, my name is then going to have a lot of different next words that might come up. And so, there are tons of words that won't come up. It's not going to be hello, my name is hello or something like that, or hello, my name is running or something like that. There are lots of things that don't work, but there are just so many names that are possible at this moment. So once a model is good at this task of predicting what's going to come next, we can then easily turn this into a generator just by sampling according to those probabilities. So for the very first question mark, there are tons of good answers. Each time we generate a piece, we'll roll the dice and sort of start with a different word. And then you'll hit moments like that moment of having to choose is, where in order to stay correct, you really just have one option. So you're really locked in at other moments. And in music, that happens too, where, oftentimes there are many good notes that could come next, but maybe the rhythm has to be locked in order to make sense. Like we have to hit that downbeat or the piece is just not going to work at all. Like that's never going to happen. So how do we translate this into music? Well, the nice thing about MIDI, which is what we're using in MuseNet, is that it's in a way already set up almost as a sequential language. And what I ended up doing was just kind of simplifying that, ordering it so that the notes would always be in a nice order, just kind of parsing that MIDI file and making it a little more straightforward. But what the model ends up seeing, it always sees first the composer, and then a start token, and also what instrument to expect. So here you would see Mozart, piano, start. And then you would see, okay, the C turns on, then C an octave higher turns on, and then you have to wait a certain amount of time. And then at the next moment, that lower C turns off, the G turns on, and you wait. The G turns off, the E turns on, and you wait, and so forth. And so the nice thing is that this ends up being a very concise notation and kind of a very predictable pattern, or at least relatively predictable pattern. It's very much the way that we semantically think about music. And so here we have that encoding, but for the first minute of a Chopin ballade. And so we'll see the very first token is going to be Chopin, and then here it's going to be piano next, and then a start token because we're at the beginning, and then we'll end up seeing the entire first minute here. This is capturing, I didn't show in the previous slide, but I'm actually also capturing the volume of all of these notes, and then also the timing of how long to wait in between each one. And one kind of fun thing you can do, because I'm always starting with that composer token in the beginning, is you can look at what the model then learns about these composers. So I'm never actually telling it anything about this. I'm never teaching it, Ravel and Fauré are similar or anything like that ahead of time. But the model has learned to map, it learns a sort of vector that represents each composer. And it learns to create similar vectors for Fauré and Ravel and Debussy, because it's learned that these composers have very similar kinds of patterns. And then in a very different part of the space, it's learned that jazz and blues and Aretha Franklin, they all have similar kinds of patterns. So it's learned similar embeddings for these ones. And one of my favorite things is you can then take these embeddings and mix and match in a way, creating a blend between multiple styles. So my favorite way to do this, one thing you could do is you could just take an average, say, of, okay, I have the vector for Mozart and I have the vector for Wagner, and let's just average the two of them and then see what comes out. You can do it that way. Although what I really like is starting with an existing piece, but giving it the wrong style and asking it to kind of continue the piece in that style. So here we're doing the beginning first 6 notes of Chopin Ballade, Chopin Nocturne. But instead of asking it to continue in the style of Chopin, we ask it to do Bon Jovi, piano, guitar, bass, and drums. So I'll start the recording a little ways in. It doesn't start at the very first notes of the Chopin, but you'll still hear the left-hand pattern going before the band kicks in. And I'm going to jump over instead and talk about Jukebox, which is the model we published this past April. This is work that I did along with Prafula Jariwal and Hiwoo Jun at OpenAI this past year. So as I mentioned, MuseNet was all in the MIDI world. Jukebox is now attempting to do the same thing, but in the space of raw audio. And again, I'll jump in with an example. This is when you ask Jukebox to imitate the style of Frank Sinatra, but giving it a totally new song that, of course, never existed at that point. This is, in fact, lyrics that were created by one of our language models called Hot Tub Christmas. It's Christmas time, and you know what that means. Oh, it's hot tub time.
It's Christmas time, and you know what that means. Oh, it's hot tub time. As I like the tree this year, you'll be in a tub. Oh, it's hot tub time. It's Christmas time. And you know what that means. It's hot tub time.
So what makes raw audio so much harder than MIDI? As we talked about, MIDI is capturing all these events. So we think of, how many events happen in music per second. It really depends on the piece, of course. But at most, you have a full orchestra going, and it's complicated at that point. But most of MuseNet, we're dealing with smaller groups, purposely, in fact, to not deal with quite so many events happening all at once. And that means we're maybe dealing with 4 to 20 events per second, something like that. Whereas we think about raw audio, so think about a professional recording. Here, in order to capture the full sound wave and not to miss any of those higher pitch frequencies, most recordings are done somewhere around like either 22 kilohertz, 44 kilohertz, sometimes even more than that. And we're also often having a left channel and right channel. So this is a lot of information to capture. And the trouble is, if you get any of it wrong, you run into problems. If you get the very, very smallest scale wrong, you have a sort of high-pitched white noise, staticky sound. If you get more the medium, sort of that envelope shape wrong, you'll have, notes that have the wrong timbre, or, words that don't make any sense. For a while, we had Jukebox singing what sounded like it ought to be English, but was just complete gibberish, which was fun, but kind of disconcerting too. And then, of course, if you get the longer structure wrong, maybe at the half a minute or minute level, then your piece isn't making sense musically. You're kind of, you have melodies that don't finish, things like that. So it's really important and challenging to capture that full range. So it's, if you think of not only having to predict the next 100 tokens, but having to predict the next, million tokens and get them all correct, that's a very difficult challenge. So the way we approach this is we actually use an additional neural net to compress the audio into something that's more manageable. And I won't get too far into the details of this one. It's called a VQ-VAE. It's sort of, we're quantizing the input But then also the VAE part is that we're asking the model to regenerate at the end. The sort of reconstructed input at the end needs to match the input in the beginning. So it's sort of this auto encoding. We're encoding ourselves with the idea that the bottleneck in the middle is forcing us to be as concise as possible at that point. So the hope is if we can go from having a really, really huge input, that 44 kilohertz signal, if we can break that down into a much smaller number of tokens, our bottleneck space, but then still have a decoder model, like another model that's able to reconstruct the input or the original audio, then we have something we can work with. We can train a transformer on those bottleneck codes, much the same way that we trained MuseNet on the MIDI codes. And sorry, that was a lot at once. And if that wasn't enough, we in fact have to then do 3 of these autoencoders in order to get the texture of the music to sound good. So we have what I'll refer to as the top level, which is our most condensed version. At that point, we're dealing with maybe 340 or so tokens per second, which is a huge compression if you think of the fact that we started with this 44,000 samples per second. However, if we then try to decode that directly, it sounds terrible. It's not, you can sort of hear what's going on, but it's very staticky, it's very noisy. You can't really hear, you can tell what words the singer is singing, but it's pretty rough. So we then train 2 more transformer models whose job it is to take the signal from the top level to the middle level and from the middle level to the bottom level. And the nice thing is that since these transformers are also sort of generating a signal, they're not only just translating directly, but they're kind of creating, we have that sampling moment where you can kind of create new ideas. And so then that's in a way able to add information back. So every time we upsample, we don't get the same exact audio out. So you can compress something, compress a piece, and then upsample it multiple times, and you'll get slight variations, like there might be a guitar line in one that doesn't show up in another, or a sort of, but sort of subtle background stuff. The main elements will stay there. But through this process, we are able to both have a super compressed signal, this top level, that we can then train a generative transformer on, and that's the level where we'll be composing new pieces. And then we'll have these middle and bottom levels that are just this process of upsampling to get back to the nice audio quality. That was a lot all at once, and I don't actually expect people to kind of understand the details of it. We do have both a paper and a blog about Jukebox if you want to then go ahead and dive into the dirty, nitty-gritty details of this all. But now, at our top level, we're training a model that's very much like a MuseNet model. And then what we're able to do at this point too is, instead of only giving it examples of the piece itself, we then went ahead and paired the lyrics sort of written out as text. And we're always telling that top level, here are the lyrics that'll show up in the sample, and then here's the music itself, the compressed tokens of the music. And in this way, the model is able to learn, okay, I know it's going to be this band or this composer. Here are the lyrics that might show up, or that will show up in it. And then here's the raw audio. And it's again got that task of just predicting at each moment what token is going to come next. And then, because it's been trained on this, we're able to provide the lyrics. When it comes time to generating, we can actually just write our own lyrics and ask it to generate based on that. So we've written, from dusk we came with humble start, from dirt to libid to cell to heart, with mitosis, with meiosis, with time. This is actually by Hiwu, one of my collaborators.
I'm dusty, tangy, almost scarred, but the lip itch tells the heart. When my toe slips, when my hair is sizzling fine. At last, when he woke up with a mind. I'm dusty, tangy, friendly help from Goethe to the picture rack. When he sees he was victorious, there's some beauty.
I wanted to talk about how you can actually go ahead and interact with these models. So for MuseNet, the best is to go ahead and visit our blog, where we have a sort of prototype co-composer tool where you're able to go ahead and choose the style, the instruments, things like that. And then the model will go ahead and give you some options of this is how the piece could go. You go ahead and pick your favorite one and then ask the model to continue from there. And by that way, you sort of have this feeling of composing, but it's more at a kind of gesture or even like a 20-30 second level thing. So you're just going ahead and at each point picking your favorite option. To the way you can interact with Jukebox. So here we have there's a GitHub repo that you can go ahead and visit. And we do have a collab, which is a sort of like a Google document kind of page where it walks you through how you can compose using Jukebox. So thank you very much. I'm happy to join now in sort of virtually in person and answer questions. But if you'd also like to go ahead, you're welcome to visit our blogs. They're the MuseNet and the Jukebox blogs.